Okay, well, a very good evening and welcome to this online meeting of the Charles Close Society. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay, everybody? Lovely. Thank you. I'm going to inflict myself on you for a few minutes before I introduce the speaker, who you probably know anyway. But I'd like to just give you a rundown on some of the future talks that are coming up soon. If you're anywhere near Dorking, folks, we're doing a talk, some of us, to the Mole Valley District Council Heritage Week. That'll be on, did I say, the 6th of September, which is a Friday. And that's going to be at the Crossways Community Church, which I'm told is quite a splendid place. Hope it is anyway. And this is called Charting the Change, how maps have depicted routes, networks and connections in the Mole Valley over the ages. What a lovely name. On the 17th of September, I'm hoping, is he here? Not yet. Nevis Hume is going to give us a talk. That'll probably be on name books in Scotland, but I haven't actually had a confirmation of the precise title to the talk yet. And Scott Lloyd of the that organisation in Wales with enormous long list of letters. I think it's the here we are, the Royal Commission on the Ancient and Historical Monuments of Wales. That's Scott Lloyd. That'll be the 8th of October. Just to remind you of a couple of things that other people are doing. The BCS, the British Cartographic Society annual conference, is on the 4th and 5th of September, a couple of weeks' time at UCL in London, which could be fun. And of course, as one of their partners, CCS will be represented in print and flag waving, if nothing else. And finally, DSA, the Defence Surveyors Association, has a seminar which might be interesting to you on the 19th in Southsea on the planning and logistics for D-Day, which is quite stunning. The new chairman there has done a remarkable job on discovering and publicising the maps that were drawn up. Total secrecy, of course, ready to invade on D-Day. That's all I'm going to say for now. If I don't know you, I'm Jerry Zieler, chairman of CCS, and you're very welcome. I'm the chairman of this talk tonight, but not the speaker. So without further ado, a very warm welcome to Peter Vujakovič, who's with his illustrated talk, Catch Them Young, Introducing Children to Meaningful Map Work. You've hopefully seen the captions before the talk started, so I'm just going to say that I've known Peter a long time through his work for BCS as now the Emeritus Professor of Geography at Canterbury Christ Church University. Peter's going to speak for about 45 minutes and has kindly allowed time at the end for questions and answers. And since we'll be muted, keep your questions till the end if you can. Otherwise, put them in chat, please, and I'll distill those and bring them up at the end of the show, or at the end, unmute or wave your hand, and we'll take your questions then. So, Peter, without further ado, I shall mute myself and over to you.
Thank you very much. I will now try and do the magic of sharing, so let's see if this works. And mine's gone totally blank at the moment. I hope it's going to come up any second. Oh, are we good?
It's come up now.
Good.
Yes,
good.
thank you.
That's good. Brilliant. Thanks very much. I've noticed also, because I'm using standard, if you move the pictures just slightly to the side, you can clear the whole of the slide and still see the people that are in the meeting. Anyway, thanks very much for inviting me. I hope this is going to be of some interest to the society. The one thing I'm going to say at the very beginning, especially seeing some of the names in the audience, that you're the experts on OS maps. I'm certainly not an expert on OS maps. And I wouldn't say I came to them late, because I've been using them since I was a child, like most people. But the particular talk today is about how several of us, and there's at least another person in the audience, Giles Darks, and some other colleagues, have been trying to help primary school teachers to use maps more effectively. We'll come back then to in a moment, and OS maps are part of that. But also what's really pleasing is the fact that Giles gave a talk last month on the Historic Towns Trust, and their maps are an important part of our project as well. So we'll see how this goes, and people can ask me questions at the end. But as I say, don't think of me as an expert on OS maps, but more as a user and someone that's trying to encourage their use, as well as lots of other maps in schools. And of course, on this opening image, you can see that you've got an OS map in the background, but layered up with the Second Land Use Survey data from the Alice Coleman Land Use Survey. There's a paper in Maplines for those of you that are BCS members, where we wrote a celebration of Alice Coleman's life. Sadly, she died just short of her 100th birthday. So it was more of an obituary in the end rather than a celebration, sadly. But this is one of her maps, and some children from, I think, Down Ampney School, and we'll be returning to Down Ampney shortly. The project that we're going to be talking about here is something that's been piloted over the last few years. And as I say, it's a combination of organisations, and I'll show you another image in a moment. But it's really about map and fieldwork in primary education. And as it says in the first sort of bullet point, one of the problems there is, and Jerry knows this, his wife has worked in primary education, that these teachers are excellent teachers, many of them, and I'm working with many, but some of them come with perhaps no geography since, pre-O level. So they have to teach as generalists across the whole of the curriculum, which will include geography and history, but also maths, art, everything. So they have to be generalists. And one of the things that's emerged out of various reviews, but particularly a recent Ofsted review into geography, is that fieldwork and map work do suffer because some teachers, despite being very good teachers, are nervous to an extent and lack experience in using maps and working in the field. And the two things work very well together, as obviously Charles Close people wouldn't know. There's no denying the closeness of work in the class with field work as well, and the importance of field work. So if teachers are sort of hesitant, how do we help them? What sort of resources can we develop? So we had some money. Funnily enough, we'd already been thinking about a project, and then the money came available. So it was the other way around rather than this particular source of funding. But Research England had money, I think it gave money to almost every university towards what it called the Participatory Research Challenge. And the idea here was that universities would participate and partner with other organisations. So they had to partner with health services, with companies, businesses, and so on. And the obvious one for Christ Church, Canterbury Christ Church University, sorry, I should have mentioned that's where I'm still based, in that sense of being a member of the university still, down in Canterbury in Kent. We'd already got good relationships with the Historic Towns Trust because they'd just completed the Canterbury map, which Giles may have talked about last month. And of course, the bizarre thing is there's a lot of incestuous stuff here. Alex Kent was involved in the steering group at the very beginning of this project. He's BCS, been president, he's the editor of the journal. I'm an ex-editor of the BCS journal. I'm Maplines now. Giles Darks is Historic Towns Trust and BCS. So we all knew each other very well as a team. And we decided we'd try for some of this money, and we were successful in gaining not a massive amount, but a few £1,000s over 2 years, the second tranche, because we were successful with the first year. And there I'm giving Giles a name call there. One of the short articles, we've published a few now in Maplines, again, if you are members of the BCS, you have that available to you, on how maps help young people appreciate their localities. That was part of the challenge. So the challenge really was, what can we do to support teachers in primary ed? And one of the things we're really interested in is this idea of meaningful maps. Strangely, that title, Meaningful Maps, is also another project which I've worked with someone called Paula Owens and Stephen Scoffham, who are both primary education experts on. But that was actually more to do with getting children to produce maps of their own. So I'll pass over that. But the general term meaningful mapping is really to do with this idea that because teachers, particularly at primary, aren't necessarily familiar with how to use maps effectively, some of these sort of exercises can be fairly plodding. They don't really excite the children. And the exercise I'm always reminded of, which is not a mapping exercise, is that for decades now, teachers, lecturers have got students to go out and do pedestrian counts and car counts. And then when you ask students, well, why did your lecturer or your teacher get you to do that? So, well, we don't know. They just thought that was a good thing to do in the field. You know, there was no explanation as to why they might do that. And some of the things that are being done in primary school classes, not all, some are very, very imaginative, but, you know, getting students to look for some feature, so they're doing something around symbolism, maybe a particular type of church with a tower, with a steeple and so on, and then provide an OS grid reference, because they have to be able to do OS grid references, as you might expect and so on. But, you know, what's the point of that? So what Paula Owens, who we'll mention more and more as we go through, and myself particularly, she's a consultant on primary. She's worked for the OS, the Geographical Association, BBC, and so on. And that is that we want to create exercises that are meaningful, that get kids to explore the landscape. We talk about being landscape detectives. And, you know, there has to be some meaning behind the map work, making it exciting for them. So that's what the purpose of our Mapping the Futures project was, with that money from Research England. The role of digital mapping is also important. Our focus was more, as you see on the bottom of the photo, of using various types of published maps. So historic town trust maps of towns and cities, OS maps, old and new, and so on. We'll come back to that in a moment. But we also do note the importance of things like Digimap for schools. There again, there's a reference to Darren Bailey. I don't know if many of you know him. He's the education expert for the OS, works with schools and colleges. So he's written something there on making meaningful maps, again, that word, all those words, with Digimap for schools. So Paula is very positive about that. We're all positive about them using the digital maps, but we see them as not a replacement, but a complement towards sort of published maps, paper published maps. So Digimap's very important. And in fact, we'll see later on the reference, but Paula Owens has written the handbook for the OS and for Adina for the Digimap for primary and also for early years. So, you know, we're positive about that. But I suspect I'm not, you know, I'm teaching grandmaster suck eggs in the sense of saying that you can't beat a paper map in many ways. And understanding people, place and landscape, it says there, is around scale issues. And we all know that when you use a digital map, especially the smaller the screen, that as you zoom in and you zoom out, you lose that context. You've got a paper map in front of you, you zoom into a locality, but you've still got the whole of that landscape there. So children really, and most people will not really understand landscapes if they start to rely entirely on screen-based maps and on digital mapping. So that's something we're very keen to do, and that will come through as I talked about some of the exercises that we've now developed. I do hate this, talking to a vacuum there. So anyway, we'll carry on. I'm sure you're all still there. Hopefully you haven't gone to sleep yet. Understanding people and place is what we were looking at. And then the bit I just have to put that in, is a wonderful quote from one of the teachers we work with, who they know maps are so precious that when the children, they often work on the floor because that's really effective as well, get them together in a group around the map like the one in the image below, but she will shout out body parts off the maps because quite often they start putting their knees on it and clambering over the maps. And they're such a precious resource. And one of the great things about the project was we were able to give away a lot of OS and Historic Towns Trust maps to schools because, you know, they are just so expensive. And it doesn't sound like they're expensive in many ways for what you're getting, but for schools, they are a precious resource. So the project, very quickly, just because I do need to introduce who's involved, Canterbury Christ Church was the sort of the core, if you like, on the basis that we had the money and they distributed the money to our project. Historic Towns Trust was the other major partner, and the BCS was probably a bit more of a sleeping partner in the end, because Historic Towns Trust put a lot more resource into it, as well as the resource we got from Research England. But again, because several members of BCS were in the team in various ways, they remained one of the three key partners. We had a steering group at the very beginning, which also included the Canterbury Archaeological Trust, who worked on the Canterbury map. The Canterbury map was pretty important in that first stage. We'll come back to that in a short while. The other two associations I've noted there are the Historical Association and the Geographical Association, who work very closely with schools. So that they were very supportive of what we were trying to do, because they support schools and teachers. But we were lucky enough to have on the steering committee, we had one ex-president of the Historic Association and an ex-president of the Geographical Association on the steering group. They happened both to be Canterbury Christ Church members as well. So that was very important that we had that set of knowledge there to help us think through what we might do. And there's a lovely extract from the Canterbury map there, produced by Giles, who's here today. Phase one, and I'll try and get through the sort of technical bits quite quickly. Phase one was very much us trying to develop some ideas. We had the background knowledge, particularly Paula and some of the others who were in primary education. I'd obviously worked more with higher education students over the years, but Giles will note the book that he produced with Mary sitting in the middle of the table there. It's another good advert for the BCS. We did get free copies of that to give out to the teachers as well. But we developed some ideas and then we tested them in a workshop with teachers in that first phase, 2022. So that was really us coming up with ideas and then field testing them effectively with the teachers to say, would this work for you? Do you think some of your colleagues who are less confident would benefit from this sort of activity? And the key themes for our work around two concepts. One was sort of civic pride, which is a big thing for Historic Towns Trust, and sustainability. So this is not about the past. Some of these things we're going to look at in a moment are historic, but they're about modern issues. I mean, those of you that have been involved with the Historic Towns map of Bath will know that it's not just about the past, it's about our built heritage and what happens in the future. How do we get people interested in that built heritage and civic pride? But the other key theme that sort of was really the geography of it, if you like, and history, was the idea of settlement, site and situation. So the Historic Town Trust maps, why is Canterbury where it is? What do the layers tell us? The Roman layer, the medieval layer and so on, in the context of that particular site on the Great Stour and so on, its relationship beyond that, so its situation to resources, to the river, to the coast, to, as you'll see in a moment, woodlands and other areas. So that was a sort of the key theme, the idea of how do we make maps meaningful through this idea of site analysis. Here's a very complicated diagram. I think you can see what it does quite quickly, but this idea, and it comes from Robert's book on making the English village, but the site and situation idea is used elsewhere in geography. And you've got the qualities intrinsic to the site. So, for example, why is Canterbury there? Did it have a good source of water supply? Was there shelter and so on, flat land available, free drainage? Well, like some other Roman towns like Cirencester, which we'll talk about later, bizarrely, it's in a funny site, which quite flooded, and you do wonder why the Romans set up where they set up in some instances, and there's a lot of debate about that for Cirencester. And then, of course, you've got this other idea of extrinsic factors or the situation. So what do you need to supply a town or even a city, such as Roman Cirencester, Roman Canterbury, medieval Canterbury? So we're then looking at things like quarries, woods, pasture, meadow, and so on. So again, both lend themselves really well to map work at various scales, detailed at the site level, and then slightly less detailed at things like the situation level, where you're looking at what resources, the geology, the soils, the qualities of that landscape. So this is where the children become landscape detectives. We're actually asking them to ask critical questions, examining the maps, gathering evidence, and then making decisions, whether it's on the settlement, which is what Paula looked at. So Paula's exercise, working very closely with Giles, who produced a series of bespoke maps from HTT data. I'm not going to talk about those. We can perhaps go back to that if we need to and and Giles can answer some of that as well, having worked very closely with Paula. And incidentally, he worked very closely with her on a project that was sort of tested out at the Historic Association in Bristol a few years back as well. So her exercise was very much using Historic Towns Trust map, one that was relatively recently published, to look at this idea of knowing your place, but understanding the historic context of that site in Canterbury. So again, there's a publication there from Paula. The exercise I'm going to just quickly run through was looking at the situation. And in this case, we looked at ancient woodlands, Kent's ancient woodlands, and what you could find out at a map level. Not a definitive answer to what's an ancient woodland, but the start of the process, almost the desk survey, if you like, prior to fieldwork, and why they still matter. Again, this was something kids, why would they be interested in ancient woodland? So what we showed them was how important ancient woodlands are today for recreational purposes, but particularly for conservation. But not just of animals and plants, but also of historic sites, wood banks, and other features within the wooded landscape. So, we showed them a very short film from the oh goodness me, the Trees Trust. I've got it. I can't remember the exact name now. You all know it. The trust for sort of woodland, the Woodland Trust. Sorry, that's the one. A very good little film, and again, not long, but just to engage them so they could see why it's important, why they need to become landscape detectives. And Laura Finn, who works in a school in Kent, worked strongly with me on that. So we published again a couple of articles, one in Maplines, but one in Primary Geographer as well. And what we do is we in terms of trying to work with OS maps and so on and engaging students, is we know that we have to stay very, very close to the curriculum. And the one thing that Paula would always say for anyone, if any of you wanted to work with schools and so on, or if any of our organisations do more, you must always go back to the curriculum, because the published curriculum is what the teachers have to work to, but thankfully they can actually be quite imaginative of how they interpret that. So particularly at primary, where you can run the day that's actually geography meets history, meets a bit of maths, meets a bit of art as well. So they are much more fluid at that stage, and that's why it's exciting to work with primary. The other reason to work with primary, of course, as we said, that they are generalists, and therefore, how do we help them to support students in map work and field work prior to going to Key Stage 3, where they're now suddenly immersed in classes with a geography teacher, with a history teacher, and so on. So that transition is something, again, that's very, very important. But here you'll see there's the quote from, well, not the quote, the reference to Paula at the bottom there, progression in mapping, geography teaching resource. And this is the resource that's been provided working with the OS and with the Dean at the University of Edinburgh for Digimap. And so I used this. I said, right, this is what we're doing. I shall use Paula's documentation to make sure what I'm doing fits the bill. So my exercise did all the things that it says there. I like the fact they use the student's voice in these rather than sort of putting it in the third person. I can relate maps to each other and to vertical aerial photographs. I can use 4- and 6-figure coordinates. I can use maps to talk about contours and slope and research factual information about locations. And if we went into it further, we could, in terms of the exercise I developed, we could look at things to do with symbol sets. We could look at some of the other things in there. But I just pick out 4 of the ones that were very important for this particular exercise. And it is there, that it was designed to conform. So we're moving away from the horrible technical stuff. And here's the first. Is it a map? Is it a diagram? This was a diagram that was designed just to be very simple, to be useful with school children. There's a lot more detail, and when we go through it with teachers, we offer them a range of resources which they can use as they want and can adapt as they want. So we always give it to them in a way that they can go, not in PDF, but Word or other form that they can then adapt to their own needs. But one of the things we developed was this map, which was a summary of a lot more information, which I'll show you just one slide of in a moment. But the idea is that if you look at Ordnance Survey maps, there's a lot of evidence, both physical and cultural, that can tell you whether something is likely to be an ancient woodland or not. And it's, again, the first stage sort of desk survey. But here, the idea is getting the children to think about being detectives. They've got to come up with a series of information, but they're given a grid, they're helped to do this. And this involves a number of interesting things. The one that's most obvious and quite fun is name evidence. If you look at maps, you'll see things. If it's called oak wood, it's likely to be ancient. So if it's got a name of a common, British tree, ash wood, or it might be slightly odd. It might be Hollin instead of holly, or it might be Nackholt, which means oak wood. It might be more complex, but that's part of the fun of interpreting it with the children. And this exercise even works very well with sort of adults as a staff development exercise. It's funny, it works from, it's one of those like the games you buy, 8 to 80 in that sense. So name evidence, but then you've got other name evidence. If it's got the name of a neighbouring parish or settlement, generally it will be an ancient woodland. It doesn't mean it is, but it's that one bit of evidence. You're building up the evidence block by block. If it's called Victoria Plantation, chances are it's not ancient woodland. But then what is the other evidence? If it's got straight internal boundaries, if it's got a regular or relatively regular shape, again, it's likely to be a modern plantation. And of course, if it's covered in the conifer symbol, so again, back to students understanding the symbol sets, that would be a help there as well. And one of the things I don't want to go into too much, but there is ancient woodland, effectively, is woodland that's been around for about the last 500 years. And it doesn't sound that ancient in that sense, but much of it is much older and medieval. But replanted ancient woodland, so if it was ancient woodland but was replanted with conifers, it still technically counts as ancient woodland, but it's of much less value. So there's that sort of technical issue that we could talk about, but I want to sort of gloss over that here. Other things like sited on steep slopes, particularly along streams and valleys and gullies, it tends to be ancient woodland. It's the bit that's left when everything else has been turned to agriculture, but those are difficult places to farm. So you use those for timber or for wood and other products from woodland and so on. Proximity to things like commons and heaths, or following things like, oh, sorry, I did change this and then something happened with my, so where it says regular shape boundaries and then the S is thrown. There were a couple of errors there I tried to deal with, but they seem to have come back when I tried to save unsuccessfully. But you're getting the drift here. There's evidence there. And so some of it is physical. So you're looking for contours, you're looking for streams, you're looking for that sort of evidence. And some of it is cultural. You're looking for place names, you're looking for proximity to things like parish boundaries and so on. I'll just give you a little bit of detail here. This is a sort of slide we would have used or have used with teachers, not with children necessarily, it needs to be adapted, just to give them the information they need, help the student turn into a detective. So there are about 6 or 7 of these slides, all to do with cultural and or physical features. And this is just one of them to give you the sort of idea of things they're being asked to think about. So name derived from wood, so Grove, Holt, Hurst. My favourite is I lived in a place called Nackholt, and there was a Nackholt wood nearby, and that means oak wood wood. So the Holt being the wood. But again, we all know that with River Avon, sort of river, and so on. So the ancient or older names often get repeated. And then names after trees, indicator trees particularly. So wild service tree is a very, very good indicator of ancient woodland. So it's called Chequers Wood, for example. It doesn't mean it is an ancient woodland, but there's a good chance that it might be. Other names, willow, lime, holly, and what have you. And then you get into some really good fun stuff, and the kids love this sort of thing. And I often use this as an example. I say to them, oh, why is that called frightwood? And you can imagine, their imaginations go rampant at that stage. And they, oh, someone was in there and something scary happened. And you go, possibly. Fright is an interesting one. I'm not aware of it being used outside of Kent, but you as the OS experts may be able to tell me. But I found quite a few frith woods over near the Cotswold edge where I now live. And frith and thrift, according to Gelling, is sort of brushwood or scrub. That's its original meaning from the Old English. And in Kent, somehow it's become fright. And I think there are a couple of fright woods at least in Kent, which is a lovely name. But again, it's a way that you can draw people into the sort of fun of place names as something that's important. The exercise I actually did was not around Canterbury, and the set of maps I use are the ones further west in Kent. The reason I like that particularly is it incorporates the wheels, and during the exercise, I've done this now with teachers, I've done it with children and so on. Some of them miss these names because they're looking, at a big map, folded out a whole OS map. But there are a number of woods called things like furnace, forge, and hammerwood. And I suspect for most of you here, you're going to see where the link is with the Weald. We're talking about sort of hammer ponds, we're talking about forges and the iron industry. So it's really nice to show people that even within an exercise like this, you've got generic issues around the naming of trees and parishes. But if you take the right landscape, there's some really interesting stuff around place names that link to past industries, past land use, and so on. This is the grid that the students are given. So as I say, there have been several more pages of that, which I could have bored you senseless with over about half an hour. Not going to do that, but you can see where it's going. And this is based on that map, the sort of the bespoke map that's provided for them. You've got the idea here. So name of a local village, tick, east of Upton village, tick, steep slope, steep valley with stream, tick, irregular and sinuous boundary. All these things add up. So the children are doing this piece of detective work where they're all sitting down, they've noted the OS grid reference, so they have to do that as part of the exercise. And then they have to choose a number of woods and decide whether they're likely to be ancient or not. And you can see there where there are crosses, the evidence is against ancient woodland. I won't go into each one of them here. But it's great fun, and there's not an element of competition. We try to avoid that. But groups of 3 to 4 students will work on this, and then we'll actually go around the class and ask them to call out the OS grid reference, not the wood name, and then one of the other groups has to shout out what the wood is. So again, you've got that sort of interactive thing going on with the children, the discovery, the fun of it, as well as sort of getting to learn the basics of using a grid reference and so on. So they'll shout out the grid reference, the rest of the team, and then one of the groups will shout out and say, oh, that's Upton Wood, or that's Oak Wood. And we'll agree that that's the right one. And quite often, the children will, as some of the teachers do, go the wrong way. And they'll read it, the OS reference, upside down. We go, no, you've got the wrong thing there. So there's a bit of fun there with that. But you can see here that this is now making it much more meaningful. They're actually doing something with purpose. And they've been introduced to why woodlands are important. The other thing that we can then do is go back to other resources. And again, these kids are pretty canny, even at Key Stage 2. They know how to use computers. They know how to deal with other sorts of data sources. And this again links back to the curriculum. And the Ancient Woodlands database from Natural England, it's open source data, is a map-based system, and you can zoom in to your area. So here we've got, again, more towards the Weald rather than Canterbury, but Benenden Wood, the name evidence is there. You can check your evidence, so they've done their work on their map. They can now go back and check that against the experts. And here, say they'd pick Benenden Wood, it's irregular in shape, etc. It seems to fit, it's near Benenden, it's near their school at Benenden, if they're at school there. But they can go and check, and they can see that this is actually designated as ancient and semi-natural woodland, so valuable ancient woodland, according to the Natural England. But also then they can provide other information, so they can start seeing data on area, perimeter, and other types of data that they may or may not use. We didn't go any further with that, just how they might use that. So that's one of the exercises, and that's the one where we tested it with them. And we've now undertaken a number of CPD events as well. Giles was at one recently over on this side of the country in Gloucestershire, where we introduce teachers to this. But the other thing that we introduce them to, which is quite exciting, is things like the National Library of Scotland resource with maps, but particularly because of the way you've got those other layers with it. And one of the things that teachers found very exciting and took away was the use of things like LiDAR. Some of them didn't know about LiDAR at all. I'm sure most people here today will know about LiDAR and how it's used. Roman roads, all sorts of things for archaeological sites are being used, as well as the modern uses of it. So those historic uses. But again, here, one of the parts of that exercise on woodland was I can relate maps and each other to vertical aerial photographs. Well, LiDAR's not an aerial photograph, but it's one of a range of things that we can relate against maps. So you've got some of the, in inverted commas, satellite imagery from Google and so on. But we've also got LiDAR, and I'll show you why that works very well for us. And I can use maps to research factual information about locations and features. So again, moving beyond just checking out ancient woodlands. And one of the other things we started looking at was imagery and relating that to maps. And this is a rather fun one. Again, it's a pity. If I had you all there, I'd be getting you to shove your hands up or shout things out. But we've got this interesting image here where you've got, on mine, I've got this thing that's overlapping the, where it says something or other oval. I can't even read it myself. For some reason, it's gone under the... Anyway,
distinctive oval or horseshoe-shaped site.
Brilliant, thanks very much. So you've got that. So you can say to them, look, you've got these imagery. This is part of your locality. I know this is in Gloucestershire. You know, what can you see? And I think some of them would very quickly interpret things like hedge lines and so on, because they used, I mean, someone with an aircraft, they're used to exploring this sort of imagery now. And you've got other features there. You've got the hedge lines particularly, but there's one where it says large linear feature, tree line. What could that be? I mean, Anne's, oh, it's not Anne, someone else has shouted something else. What could it be? Anyone got any ideas? What a long sinuous linear feature?
Hedge.
Hedge, very, very wide hedge. You can see the hedges, that hedge line at the top. At this scale that's shown, I can't tell you what exact scale is because you obviously zoom in and out. So there's a hedge. It's quite a wide bit of wooded land, if you like. And what is the horseshoe shape? Now, I don't expect people to know necessarily. The other linear feature is actually a railway. I mean, it could be a road, couldn't it? But it's a railway in that case. But it's getting them interested in other things. So we can go back to, this is where historic OS maps come in, because quite a lot of them have some really good detail on archaeology, particularly when you get to some of the very, very large scale town maps and so on. I mean, in Cirencester, I was surprised to find that on those maps, you've got the town plans, you've got the number of seats in churches. It actually shows the latrines in the barracks in Cirencester, labels them. I mean, it's amazing the detail there, but that's because I'm not normally using that scale. I'm more countryside based as well. But here we quickly see.
Peter, sorry, it's Jerry here. Can I just interrupt a minute? Yeah. You're drifting off mic a bit to the right. If you come back left, it's a bit difficult to make out what you're saying sometimes.
I was leaning towards my drink, I think. Sorry, I've had a little drink now. I'll stick. Is that better?
Absolutely, thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, and as you can see here, this is, you know, a nice image of this particular house in the countryside, Shrewsbury House. This is just southwest of Cirencester, but that feature, the linear one that someone said was a hedge, we can now see is actually the route of a canal. So it says Old Canal. It's the Thames and Severn, I think if I get it right, it will come up again in a moment. But also you suddenly see that horseshoe shape, it's a camp. So it's got the, you know, that historic stamp on there using the OS type for that particular type of site, camp, source of the Thames, which is, now that's something, if we get to question, I'm not going to talk about it now, but that's disputed. For some obscure reason, both the Ordnance Survey and the Environment Agency think the source of the Thames is here over towards Kemble. Some of us who live in this area think that's total rubbish, and the real source of the Thames is the River Churn coming out of Seven Springs. But again, we can come back to that, and we can harry the OS about that at some point. And again, this idea of linking it to fieldwork, what would happen if you went into the field with just that information? You've got the map, you know there's an old site there, but what does it look like? And in fact, you know, unless you're prepared to trespass and rip your trousers apart on the barbed wire, you can't get into the site. And that's what the embankment looks like from the old historic site. Not very exciting, a nice area to walk through, but, you know, not really much information there. It doesn't really give you a feeling for what, you know, that historic site looks like. Similarly, if you go and look at the canal, you know, you can't really walk along the length of it. It is massively overgrown. You can get to places like this with a bridge over it, but you can see it's in terrible state of disrepair. So where's the magic? And again, I think teachers found this really exciting. So, you know, it may be commonplace to us, but things like LiDAR are something that sometimes they're not even aware of, but certainly not aware of its potential. And, you know, if you use DSM, digital surface model, where you can see the houses and the trees and so forth, then it gives you a slightly different view of this site. But again, some of the stuff is still obscured. So the line of the railway is very clear now. The source of the Thames is still there, but we still don't have a real feeling for both the modern, the canal system, the railway system, and so on, and the ancient. It's likely that this site was probably Iron Age, but was actually also taken over and used by the Romans as a fortified site. But again, the evidence is scanty from the archaeology, I think. But then, we moved to DTM, where by the magic of LiDAR, we can actually penetrate through the cover. And again, we won't go into the technical, as most of you will know about that, the way in which it can show features beneath woodland, and some of the other images, which I'll show you, but only if people want to at the very end. You've got areas of very thick cover of trees, but you can see through, in inverted commas, and see all these features. So here you're getting to a situation you can much clearer the embankments, so the old Roman or Iron Age embankments and so on. And then finally here, quite different from that first image, where a lot was obscured by, not necessarily quite woodland cover here. Some of the other images I've got are of woodland rather than just sort of wooded regrowth. But the ditch and bank structures that can come through, the old canal becomes much clearer. And then things like quarries. So just below the word ditch to its southwest there, there's a more modern quarry and so on. So you can start to talk to the children about lots of other things, and they love it because, again, it's exploration. They go, wow, I can see through trees. I can see things that you wouldn't even imagine are there. And they get quite excited, particularly if it's old sites and old fortifications and so on. Right, I'm aware of time. We started a bit after. I'll move on to the next phase quite quickly and just take you through that. What we then moved to, so part of it's this process, what were we doing? And the second phase was very much to get teachers and schools involved. And here, instead of us being the people coming up with exercises and saying, would this work for you? And we think the woodland one does seem to have gone down very well. And I mean, Giles was a CPD event we did with that. I've done a couple of CPD events, and teachers really like it. It's a nice thing they can take away, and they know they can do in their own area with their own OS maps, with their own woodland and so on. The second phase was to work with teachers and pupils, it's all very trendy wording now, but as active agents in the curriculum. They were curriculum making, is a trendy term in education now. There were two particular exercises. There were 3 projects in the end. I won't mention the third one. That was a slightly different and didn't use OS or other maps in the same way. One was Gravesend. I put Gravesend and Empire, and that really was Paula working with a teacher there. My name gets called, but partly for running the project more broadly. And this looked at the whole issue of the place of Gravesend in its locality, but also globally. So you have the wonderful issue of the tale of Pocahontas, who's brought over from the colonized North America. But then you've also got the stories. You've got Conrad and the Heart of Darkness talking about the Thames and passing through Gravesend and so on. So that link to empire more generally. So her project, or the project that was undertaken there, and is now a legacy in terms of other people using it, was very much looking at Gravesend's place in its locality on the Thames, but also in the wider empire. The other one was about empire, but a different empire, the Roman, and that's the one where I worked with Helen Russell. So there's H. Russell at the bottom there, all roads lead to, and that was published again in Maplines, just a 2-pager. And this was using maps, not the Historic Towns Trust, because sadly they've not got around to Cirencester yet, or I've got to convince people here that they want one. But we used a range of maps. So we used OS maps that were contemporary, historic OS maps, and a range of maps at different scales to try and get children to understand, again, site and situation, but more broadly what we might call core and periphery. That, Rome, the core of the Roman Empire was Rome, Italy. We were on its periphery, but Cirencester, the second largest Roman town in Britain, allegedly, was probably likely to have been not only a civitas, an important local administrative centre, but also potentially the capital for Britannia Prima, which was the Roman province to the sort of southwest. Nobody knows exactly what it covered, but towards Cornwall, Wales as well, perhaps. So an important site, Corinium, Dominorum, or Cirencester. So we wanted to explore that, and this was using And you can see the child there using a bespoke map that we produced for, or in fact I produced. It's quite clumsy. I'm sure anybody who makes maps will definitely think that when they see it. But it was a useful sort of diagrammatic map to help children understand the locality as they walked through it. But we used a range of maps, so from the global to the local, so using maps in class. So the teacher would have shown them maps of the Roman Empire and Britain's place in it as a start of an exercise. And what happened there, in fact, was again that Helen had to put together something on the Romans for her curriculum. It was fundamentally about history, but she was keen as someone who's a geography lead to draw in the geography and history together. So it was her sort of initiative, and her and I working together and using different resources. So I led most of the field day that we had, but she started by setting the scene in terms of the Roman Empire, core and periphery. We then brought it down to things like Roman Britain. So you've got the wonderful OS historic maps. So we're back to the OS at last, thankfully, for the audience. But you've got that wonderful historic map of Roman Britain and of prehistoric Britain as well. There's several of these maps, and you can spread the whole thing out, and the children get a real understanding of the position of Carinium, Cirencester in that Roman world. You know, the roads are there, the main cities are there. They can see the links. They're on the Fosse Way. They're on Ermine Street. They're on Aikman Street. Like 3 major Roman roads running into Carinium that link, you know, down to sort of Acropolis, Bath, beyond that to Exeter. We've got the road that leads up Ermine Street to Gloucester, an important colonia, a colony for Roman veterans and so on. So this wonderful sort of story starting to unpack from the sort of global scale, if you like, global in those terms, down to the local. You might wonder why that Cotswold tourist map was there. It just happened to be the one that I had available, and while I feel bad about it, I did put highlighter pen all over it, you know, because I wanted the children to be able to see where Cirencester sat. So there's my scruffy arm there, and that 1 inch of the mile map, the Cotswold tourist map, spread out on the toposcope at Cirencester's amphitheatre. And again, the toposcope itself, well, they called it, it's not really a toposcope, I don't think, but on the edge of the Cirencester amphitheatre, we've got this wonderful toposcope. You can see where the children are sitting, the scale of this thing. So we were able to look at these range of scales and explain to the student why Cirencester where it is and how it linked in with the economy and society of Roman Britain as a whole. And then what we did with the field work was getting them to use a map like this, a diagrammatic map. It was based on various published maps, but to make it simple, make it something they could relate to very easily. And the idea was that they would then walk Roman Cirencester. And there was an element of using the imagination. So much of what we've done up to this point has been about factual information, about bringing information together to make a decision about woodland, ancient woodland, and so on. Here, we're starting to get them to think a little bit more imaginatively, but still think in geographic and historic terms. And the idea was that on the day, they would be led on a walk through Roman Cirencester, and they would use not only their sense of sight, but they would map smells, touch, other senses as they walk through the town. They'd have to think about what they were interacting with. So it was an imaginative element coming into play here in terms of the geography, the history of the town. And you can see Verulamium Gate at the sort of northeast, if you like. And then we were walking the Fosse Way, which is one of the few roads that really does still follow. I'm trying to think of the name of the modern street. It doesn't matter too much of it. Lewis Lane. Lewis Lane runs pretty much along the line of the old Fosse Way through from Verulamium to Bath Gate, and then on to the amphitheatre, which still exists. It's grassy banks now. All the stonework and the woodwork is gone, but it was the second largest amphitheatre in Roman Britain, again after London. And again, using a whole range of different types of visualizations. So these oblique artistic views become important as well. You know, is it a map? Is it a different sort of graphic? It has map-like qualities, doesn't it? So the idea was they would walk from point A through the gateway, through the town, dropping in at the Forum and Basilica. And there is some evidence they can go and see, and we took them to. And we took them to the Roman wall. So where it says gateway and town wall, you've got the second arrow going up to the wall. Approximately there is a bit of the wall to be seen, so they could see these sites. But they were also having to try and imagine themselves out of the modern town with its cars and traffic and into the ancient town. So again, we used a range of resources, again, less map-like, if you like, but still visualizations. And here, getting them to think. They had to make notes and think about it as they were going through, and we interacted with them. And how could things change? And one of the things that people point out is, of course, Romans, the town wall possibly was never really designed primarily as defensive, but more as a show of power and prestige. But one of the things that most people, if they lived in the countryside, as local Britons would never have had that weirdness of walking through an archway like that, and the sound, the echoing and the noise. That would all add to this dramatic effect of visiting the centre of power and so on. So getting children to think about those things, the senses, and how they also play into power in the landscape, political power, economic power, and so on. And I won't show you them all, but again, at the other end, this is the bit they love, of course, because they're taken to the amphitheatre. And most on this side, they want gladiatorial combat, even though there's no archaeological evidence of gladiatorial combat at Cirencester. But there probably would have been awful types of animal baiting, as well as ballet and plays and music and so on. So again, we're trying to get them to use maps at a range of scales to release that historic imagination, that geographic imagination. And then lovely things. I mean, they're great when they come to writing up their diaries afterwards. So that was a class exercise afterwards, when they start thinking about things like street food, because Roman street food would have been pretty similar. Most of them balked at the idea that fried liver was probably a staple of sandwiches in those days and things like that. But again, we don't know absolutely. But the point that the old quarry by the amphitheatre would have been used as a dump, and then centuries later it then became actually a cemetery. And they know that they've dug through it and found that sort of the waste layer that then became a layer in which a cemetery was established. So a lot of history there that they can think about and understand. And this came through as a sensory walk diary. So I probably drifted a long way away from the interests of Charles Close Society, but you can still see what we're trying to do there, using factual information, empirical information in some parts of the exercise, but always that idea of sense of place, using maps to get people to explore locality. And in this case, finally, a much more imaginative approach. So Dear Diary, I walked through Verulamium Gate, the noise was deafening. There's quite a few mentions of horrible smells associated with sort of blood and guts in the amphitheatre. I haven't dragged out all those. So that's sort of giving you hopefully some idea of the sort of approach that we've been taking. Where are we going next? I thought, as everyone seems to be mentioning the Bath map now, I presume this is what the cover will look like when it's all printed. Apology if it's not. It's the one I think it's on HDT's website, so that's where it came from. But what we want to do now is do more CPD. I've done a few now, and it seems to work really well. I mean, teachers are really keen to be introduced to not just they know how to use OS maps, but what else they can do with them. So other interesting exercises rather than just the very basic things about OS grid references and so on. So they like the trees exercise. They like being introduced to resources like the National Library of Scotland, OS maps, and the other information that comes with that, the other layers that they can expose and compare. So I was surprised about how few of them knew about it. It's just perhaps one of the most wonderful resources out there. And then the creation of generic resources. So things like the woodland exercise has already been developed in that way. It was free to GA members who could go onto their site. So all the resources we developed for that, the PowerPoints, the spreadsheets for teachers, notes, and for children's notes and so on, that was all there and has been used by some. And that's something that, again, people like Giles, myself, Martin, who's the development officer at HDT, are talking about now with Paula about how do we develop some other types of resources from not just HDT maps, which are a wonderful resource. And again, Giles can talk about the way in which he can draw out layers. So you've got the basic maps, which has all the layers on, for the particular place, you know, medieval, Jacobean, Georgian in this case, that he can draw out key bits. So for the Canterbury exercise with Paula, he could draw out just the Roman roads layer, or the Roman roads and key sites layer, whatever it would be. So that sort of generic resources someone can do. And the final part of that is, I suppose, this idea of upscaling. The Historic Towns Trust, I think the way we are looking at it now in recent conversations is to focus on towns across Britain where there is a map, and using that as the basis for trying to develop a range of resources, not just using Historic Towns Trust maps, OS maps, LiDAR imagery, whatever else it might be, but focusing in on those towns where maps already exist. And we think that's perhaps the best way to lever some funding, some national level funding. With any luck, you'll be pleased to know, I think that's the famous one at the end that says, thank you, any questions, which means I've now drawn to a code. That's a bit long, I'm sorry, I think I've overshot by 10 minutes or so.
Oh, it doesn't matter, I kept you waiting a bit anyway. Thank you very much indeed, Peter. What a fascinating romp. I wish my geography lessons had been so interesting. The lucky kids that have experienced your events. Well done. I've learned a couple of words looking at your slides. One of them was Glevum is Gloucester, which I'd never known. And in that circular diagram showing us where, for example, Canterbury or similar settlements were, one of the sectors of it was, I think, quarries and turbaries. Can you get out of my misery? What's a turbary?
It's a strange hat worn by Arab. Oh no, it's turban. Turbaries is peat diggings.
Ah, excellent.
I don't know if it includes other types, but my understanding is peat works. So,
thank you very much. Well, can I invite anyone who would like to wave an electronic hand, perhaps, or come through on chat, or just unmute and shout?
Shall I shut this down so we can see everyone?
What a good idea. What a good idea. Unless you want
to know how to do it, but
unless you want to refer back to any slides with questioning.
How do I release myself from this?
I can stop you.
Yeah, if you know how to get to go back to the screen.
Just 1 minute.
I mean, that's a lovely LiDAR image again to use, because the site is covered in trees apart from the amphitheatre itself.
Yeah.
So again, for the kids who know the area, being able to see that sort of information.
Peter, the easiest thing is for you to just cancel the share. Cancel.
Yeah.
share.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Okay. Can I just while you do that, let me just mention John Enno's in the audience, and he's been liaising with Charles Close Society on the Bath HTT map, and that is imminent. It's being printed now by our friends at Dennis Maps, and because Charles Close Society has co-sponsored that, there will be maps available through the society, hopefully at a discount, which reminds me, folks, that until the end of September, if you go to the HTT website and put in CCS 2024, you will get 15% off. So do that before September the 30th if you haven't got any of their excellent maps. There's a whole range. I think it's 17 maps now in total. But once again, Peter, thank you so much. Any questions for Peter? I'll try and stop talking. Everyone's wholly satisfied.
Giles lit up for a second there, but I don't know if he's going to say anything.
Giles?
Hello. Yeah. Sorry. Thank you ever so much, Peter. That really was interesting. I mean, I have, as you know, actually tried some of these exercises, and they really are fascinating. And I think that one of the conclusions that you hinted at there was that these are actually appropriate for people of all sorts of ages. Yeah. And so that is great news, because it means that you can use these exercises with upper primary pupils, but you can then also use them with pupils and indeed adults of all sorts of ages. And just as a general observation, there are lots of people who are interested in reading maps, but actually don't really sort of look at it in that formal way of actually analysing shapes and things like that, which is truly intriguing. So I think it is they're very valuable exercises on lots of different levels.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think the other thing to note, I suppose, is, well, first of all, you're right. Originally, I devised that woodland exercise to be used with first-year undergraduates. It was a good way just to find out about map skills, how many of them didn't quite understand six-figure grid references and so on, got it the wrong way around,
Yes.
and a few other things there. So it was a good way of it was a good icebreaker early on in the first year, get them working together on maps and so on. But it worked very well, and I've done it as a sort of a staff development exercise. When one of these dreadful things, you're meant to go away on a away day, and everyone's got to come up with some little thing to do with each other, so team building, all the rest of it. So I ran that once for that, and with administrators and lecturers. It works, but it works really well with that age group, because the key concepts are not difficult as a grasp, or the things you've got to look for.
Yeah.
But as you say, I think the thing I'm really interested in is the primary age for other reasons. And I think Giles will know about this, to do with HTT, this idea of civic pride and and interest, and John and others who are backing the maps and so on. And I'm using it as, I think I use the term quite often now, a Trojan horse. Primary is a great place to get in because the kids are still enthusiastic, and I don't think it's their fault. I think it's the education system. They lose that enthusiasm as they go into secondary. It might be to do with hormones, it might be to do all sorts of things, but they are so enthusiastic at that stage. But it's where I think the term community is a loaded term. I'm never sure how I want to use it, but I think you can see a community and use it in a sensible way around schools, and that's where a lot of parents meet friends through the kids at that age. It's more local, although kids are bussed in from some distance sometimes. And I work with the local civic society, so I'm on the committee for the local civic society now, and a town guide. And I say to them, look, that's if we want to get into other, because the demographic for civic societies is very grey. And not surprising. They're the people who've got time and interest and so on. But if you want to engage and do what civic society should really do, and what HTT want to do, and many of us in other formats, geographical association and so on, you've got to try and get into the right group. And I think primary is the place to get in. You can work with local schools, the parents are interested, the kids come back with, having done exciting things in history and geography, hopefully. And so I'm saying, not just here, but elsewhere, let's use primary schools as a Trojan horse into local groups and local populations to sort of enthuse them in terms of sustainability, heritage, and those things. So that's why I'm very keen on that age group. Also, in terms of education, the transition, there's almost, if you talk to anyone in schools education, the transition from Key Stage 2 in a primary school to Key Stage 3 is so critical, and the Key Stage 3 teachers want to know what's going on in primary school. So I'm going to hopefully run a Gloucestershire Geographical Association Day in the coming year on field work. And in fact, it was that event you came to. Oh no, it wasn't. It was a different one. Sorry, Charles. But we had someone talking about field work, and she was brilliant. And she was teaching Key Stage 3. But she said, I really want to engage with Key Stage 2, to find out what happens, because they come to us and we're never quite sure what they've come across, what they've done, and of course they've come from a range of different schools. So I'm rattling on about the education bit now, but that's what excites me about working with maps, and field work, but doing it at that Key Stage 2, that transition to Key Stage 3. And I think that's what we've agreed, isn't it, Giles, that if we do some more work with HTT, particularly on this project with Martin and so on, that we do focus on that demographic. And
that's right, absolutely. There's a great deal of potential at that age. There really is. Yeah.
Well, thank you for the question, Giles. You came out of the darks and into the lights then.
Ho, ho, ho. They don't get better with age, Jerry, do they?
Peter, more and more interesting things. Anne's had a hand up for ages. You put it down now.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's after still. Thank you. That was fascinating. It's a long time since I was at primary school, and I was very impressed with the interpretation required and the understanding required of maps. I would have said that was more secondary school than primary school, but yeah, it's always very good to introduce the topic to younger people. But I wondered if young children, well, I don't know about children, so you'll have to tell me, but aren't they these days more interested in seeing maps online on their digital devices? You know, they want to see it on their phone. They don't want to use a piece of paper.
Well, I think in terms of both those bits, I suppose I'll answer the last one first. I think they need to be exposed to paper maps, and as I said, you spread one out on the floor or on your wall, and we know that you'll get a lot more just standing there. You can focus in, focus out. It's not the same as zooming in and zooming out. You lose things as you do that on the screen. So we, I think all of us involved in this project are keen that they use paper and digital resources. And I don't think so. They love it. You put the map out on the floor, and like I said, there was a body parts off the map, there's a shout that goes, because they just crawl around, they go, oh look, and they're leaning over and their knees start going, got it, because they're trying to get to the other side of the map. They actually enjoy it. I mean, and
yes,
I think
it's an adventure.
Yeah, but the other thing is, you're right, you might say that it seems that some of that is sophisticated, but it is what the curriculum asks for. So,
That's good news.
My exercise was, based on Paula's documentation for Digimap and the national curriculum, both for history and geography. And the interesting thing is, I run this past teachers, and the first time I ever talked about it was developing this for primary, and I did it in front of it was a large lecture theatre at the Geographical Association. It was full of people who were primary and secondary educationalists, lecturers, teaching teachers, and people from both secondary and primary. And when I sort of asked for hands up and, do you think this exercise would work with Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3? They said, yeah, it's fine, it will work. And I think demonstrably, in fact, the first time I tested it with a younger age group, it was Key Stage 3. And that's why I didn't want to go into that detail, but Laura Finn, whose name got mentioned, she teaches Key Stage 3. But she'd been an ex-student of mine. In fact, she'd done some research, which I then wrote up with her on something entirely different. So we knew each other well from that point of view for working. And then I've done it with the local schools here. I've done it with CPD events with primary school teachers. They think that's fine. It hits the requirements and the capabilities. I mean, there will be some kids who struggle, but then there's some undergraduates who struggle.
Thank you, man. Thank you, Peter. I wonder, are there any primary school teachers in the audience tonight who are still with us? And what do you think of it?
Good question.
Would you like to do an event like this, perhaps, but or a program? But do we have any teachers? Nope.
Can I just say something there, Jerry? Just sorry to interrupt you, but a couple of years ago, I was at the Historical Association conference, which Peter mentioned, with Paula Owens giving a presentation about how you can use our maps with Key Stage 2 children. And I went to another session, which was quite a large session. It was about 70 or 80 teachers there, of both primary and secondary pupils. And the person giving the presentation asked them, they were history teachers, asked them how many of them used maps in their teaching of history. And it was only about a quarter of the number there, which to me was absolutely shocking, because you need to understand where something is, where something takes place, I think, in order to understand how it takes place and all the other ramifications. So we know that there is a huge potential there to introduce maps into teaching in history as well as geography, and indeed in all sorts of other subjects as well. And for map enthusiasts like us, it sort of seems fundamental, doesn't it, that as part of our mission, that we should actually get maps much more widely used in school education.
I mean, one of the things that's coming back to, it was great that Historic Towns Trust gave me a pile of maps that we could give away to teachers, so to engage them in the projects. And the money that I got from Research England, I invested in OS maps and historic maps, and I just bought them. You know, if I had any money left over, it did not go back. It got spent on a big pile box of. I've got some upstairs which I now use for CPD as well. But I gave them away because they're so desperate for maps, and I think, you know, that's part of the problem. So it's a, you know, it's a bit of a circular issue, isn't it? If they haven't got the resource, they haven't got the maps, they're not going to use them. One thing which might be quite fun to know what people would think about here is the OS did a map. Oh God, what's the term they used? Amnesty a few years back, where you've got a voucher. So if you handed back an old OS map, you've got a voucher. I think it was just a way of getting people to buy new OS maps, but maybe at a discount. We've now talked about something called, because one of my colleagues doesn't like the term amnesty, so we went for map rescue. I've already started a trial it with Gloucestershire schools, but we're going to try it with a range of organisations where we actually ask people to surrender old OS maps. It doesn't matter if they're a little bit tatty. It doesn't matter if you're surrendering a map of Snowdonia to a school in Gloucestershire, because they can then compare, you know, the contours, the landscape, you know, the things that don't show up on a Gloucestershire map. But at the moment, they haven't got that resource. They might have Digimap and they might be able to do it that way. So, but to be able to spread old OS maps out from all over the country and say, look, this is what the Fens looks like. This is what Snowdonia looks like. You live in Gloucestershire. What symbols are missing? You know, why is it different? All the things we were talking about, exploring and really getting excited by your geography and history, is something we're trying to do. We've not got very far with that yet. So I think we started this off, I think, just before schools started to break up. So we're going to have another go. But I've got this terrible feeling that I'm probably going to get more back from, not from schools doing it with their parents and friends and family, but probably through things like maybe the Charles Close, but certainly Cirencester Civic Society. You know, the demographic again is such that they'll have a big pile of old OS maps, and Luminell surrender a few of them to schools again to sort of, you know, try and get kids engaged. But it's a resource they can't afford it. You know, they really, you know, they take in their own rulers and posters. And when a teacher leaves a school, a lot of them take the posters down because they're theirs. They take away the stapler and the scissors because they're theirs. They've had to buy them because the resource is just not there. It's terrible to think about it. And field work, they just can't afford. So again, you know, doing the sort of things that Historic Towns Trust do, and we do, you know, locally and things, Gloucestershire, GA, local field work, so they can perhaps get to it without the, you know, several £100 worth of cost for a coach, you know, that few of the teachers can now afford.
And wasn't it wonderful, those both, I don't know what happened with the first one, but certainly the second land use was such glorious sunny summer bicycling adventures at school. It made you a mapaholic for life, I think. Anne, you've raised your hand. Second question?
Yes, sorry, there's just something I found out today that might be of interest to this community. I'm a volunteer at the National Archives, and I'm located in the staff reading room where some of the staff members work. And I saw this chap poring over a map, and he had his computer and he was tapping away. And I said, "Oh, what are you working on?" And he said he's in a small project where they are capturing details from the 1941 farm survey. The whole country was surveyed in about 1941, and so for every farm, the land ownership is recorded on a map, and the state of the farm and the use of the farm and who's using the farm was all recorded. So that's a work in progress, and it's going to take about 3 years. There's 3 of them working on it full time, and they've done 6 counties so far. There's, I don't know, 50 counties, so 18 months I think they've got it.
What are they using as a base map, Anne?
The actual maps
Of 1941? I mean, which scale and
the various dates. I think he showed me some. It depended what they had at the time. This was wartime, and they're at, some of them were blown up. Some were at their original scale. I suppose it's just what they had to hand.
Interesting.
But so there are different scales, but they've got those beautiful demarcations of each piece of land. You know, a yellow border, an orange border, a blue border, and they've got numbers, and there's a notebook and a form that's filled in for each property. Very interesting. I look forward to that coming out in.
Are they going to publish this research?
Well, it's going to be online at TNA, so
Right. Oh, excellent.
yeah, great. So this is happening, but it's all going to be online. I don't think it's going to be a paper, anything that's coming out.
I was just going back a notch. I was itching to say that, you know, what are the advantages of paper maps, in this case for kids, obviously, over gadgets or students generally. And I would give the same answer to that question on those people as I do to mountaineers. Your batteries don't go on a paper map.
In the future, the drones will do it all for
it
us.
still works. Sorry?
It'll be the drones doing it for us. We won't go out. The drones will go out and look.
Yeah, take a drone for a walk.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for those questions. What anything else to ask Peter before we split? T-News, there's a chat message from T-New de Cruz. Can I just read that out? Why can't I get it up? Here we are. The National Archives Digitization Project, the National Farm Survey of the Second World War, is the subject of a massive new digitization. Oh, I think he's repeating what we've heard from you, Anne, our researcher.
Hello, Tino. Are you at TNA? No.
Tinu's been at Liverpool. Are you still there, Tinu?
Yes, yes. Firmly entrenched in Liverpool, as you can tell by my accent. This is just a quote from a report from Rose Mitchell of the TNA about that she gave to BRICMIX, the British and Irish Committee for Mapping Information and Cataloguing Systems, for their last meeting. So it just
so I saw it in action. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. Very interesting news. Worth keeping an eye on.
Yeah, they're doing Wiltshire at the moment. You'd be pleased to know.
Just down the road.
Lots of countryside. Gosh, that was a stamping ground of mine once, a long time ago. Thank you very much. I think we're knocking 9 o'clock. So Peter, thank you very much indeed for all the time and effort you've put into this today and in the run-up. And here's to the project continuing successfully forever and ever, and finding funding, which is successfully being done by HTT as well, isn't it? What will be the next map after Bath, Giles, for HTT? Can I ask that?
Yeah, you can indeed. So the next one to be published will be Ripon, which will also be out in October. And then Chester, which I hope will actually be out before Christmas. If not, then it'll be very, very shortly afterwards. And then we've got a number of others in the pipeline, including Bradford, which is UK City of Culture in 2023. And we've got several other candidates as well. So enough to keep us out of mischief, I'm sad to say.
Jolly good. And let me again reiterate Giles and HTT's kind offer to give CCS members 15% off till the end of September. I'm sorry that hasn't got greater publicity so far. I will chase that up in the morning.
Okay.
I don't know why that is, but can I make a plug for one other CCS publication before we split this evening? And that is to remind you that now available online in the CCS shop on the website is The Origins of the Ordnance Survey in Ireland, to celebrate the OSI's 200th. And that is available at £30 to members. Go for it. Go for it. We have bought a limited number of these books, and so you get it absolutely post free. quite a heavy tome, and you're going to ask me who it's by, aren't you? Finian O'Connor, I think I should pronounce it, but it's been reviewed very highly. So once again, Peter V, thank you very much indeed, and very good to see everyone again, and we'll see you at the next month's meeting, hopefully, which is on the date I gave you earlier, and I've lost it. Never mind. You'll get the newsletter with the full details in it. I hope, if Nevis is still okay with it, it's Tuesday the 17th of September on the usual Tuesday at 7:30. So I wish you all, especially our speaker and all the questioners this evening, a very good night.